And this is why I dislike those particular discourses on women and family amongst the leftists, the ones that are extremely popular amongst leftists. I know, Hannah, that you had not corrected yourself, I apologize, but you had enunciated your thoughts on abolishing the family as a Marxist concept. We're specifically talking about abolishing the bourgeois family, which was a family that existed specifically for the translation of property and capital amongst generations. So this was not a family per se. It was just a mode of moving money, basically, you can say, moving assets. But for me, I know it might seem counterintuitive, but I always defer to Zetkin, Kollontai, Krupskaya, Lenin, and Marx on women in the family. I think there's been a tremendous psyop enacted by low-value men and their handmaidens in liberal feminism, which once again, low-value men are puppet mastering liberal feminism, and they are discrediting women's traditional role, their reproductive role. And when you think about it, liberal feminism in general has been dedicated to the denigration and devaluation of the female reproductive traditional role. And again, I think that liberal feminism, puppeteered by low-value men, and it's more liberal than it is feminism. I want to make that clear too. But they treat women and they treat femaleness, they treat femininity as if it is some terrible, nasty, evil thing when it isn't. Cross culturally, you'll find that women, prior to industrialization, women have been tied to the social directive role. In cultures traditionally associated with pre industrial, pre colonial, pre Christian societies, women have been at the center of any society as the keepers of wisdom because they literally birth the next generation. Their input is invaluable. They shape the next generation by virtue of their role, by virtue of the wombs that are inherent to them. And this, by the way, is not me, because I know there's probably people going to say, oh, you're saying that women without wombs or women who can't have kids or women who don't have kids are invaluable. No, I'm just referring to traditionally this was the case. So I just want to caution you guys against always ascribing this horrendous idea of the family to the low value male ideal of what women should be and how women should behave and what the family should actually represent, because it's just them slithering the way that they always slither, like snakes. They're just slithering. That's it.
About the idea that it's low value men puppeteering this, it's not just on the left, actually. I think, and we've talked about this in our podcast before, how men set up these false binaries where they're like, oh, on the right, if you want security or if you want to be only raped by one man instead of like 27 men in a day, like a prostitute, they're like, okay, you can just be a prostitute for one man. That's a wife, is basically how men have set up society. But if you want security, then you have to serve and obey me, and I'm the head of the household, and you have no voice, and you have to like serve me the way I serve God, and like because I'm a god, like that kind of shit, right? On the left, it's like leftist men see, this is again another Andrew Dworkin quote, like men on the right see women as private property, men on the left see women as public property. And so notice how they set up these false binaries where like if you want to be not serving one man, then you have to be, uh, a prostitute, basically. And even for women who don't literally choose prostitution, and Andrew Dworkin talks about this too, how in the workplace, and it's crazy how she wrote this like 20, 30, like 30 years before Me Too, and the whole idea of like sexual harassment in the workplace being a shitty thing for women. She wrote about how like right wing women see the way that working women are sexually harassed or are paid less or treated worse when they try to have a non-prostitution job. So men purposely set up these binaries where like you can either be a wife or a prostitute, and if you try to be neither, you'll be punished for it. They'll try to make you into a prostitute anyways. They'll be like, "Oh, suck my dick and I'll put you in this movie," kind of thing, right? So, yeah, again, like these are narratives that are set up by men to benefit men, to create choices, to force women into choices, neither of which benefit us, but both of them benefit men. And so that's why we need to come up with our own political narratives. And earlier, when Hannah mentioned the family and rethinking family structures, I think is what she said. And then Floofy, and I get this a lot talking to conservative women. It's like this idea that the left wants to abolish the family, and I don't think so. I think actually family is very important. I think it's the like a kind of a microcosm of society. It's where you learn how to be a human, right? Is in the family. But the patriarchal structure of like man leads the house, wife obeys him, does all the cooking, cleaning, fucks him every day so that he can get his sexual needs met, blah blah blah. That is not has not been the family structure norm for actually a good chunk of human society. And I honestly like I unironically want a matriarchy, and I often hear from men like, oh, like there's no examples of matriarchies like succeeding, blah blah blah. In fact, there are examples of successful matriarchies. The unfortunate thing is that because men are more violent, the reason like patriarchies very often tend to conquer matriarchal societies because they're more violent, right? Um, so I was talking with one of our subscribers in our like Patreon Discord, and she's Navajo, and she was telling me how Navajo traditionally is more matriarchal, and like the woman joins, or the men when they get married, the woman stays in her family, and the man joins her family. And so this puts women in, and it's the same thing I think for the Iroquois or Iroquois. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but um, like women have real political power. They select the chief. They have a lot of respect as and are treated as leaders and respected in society. And so yeah, basic like what Anna said, because we create life, we are raising the next generation and so on. And the idea of like the man joining the woman's family blew my freaking mind when I first heard about this. I was like, this is genius. This is genius because if there's problems in the family, they can just kick him out. Like if he's being a piece of shit, they can kick him out. And they're with her family, and hopefully your family is like nice to you and supports you and loves you and stuff and will back you up if your husband's being shitty and will keep him in line. But yeah, women staying with their families, and when women go to other families, for example, they're often treated as like the scullery maid or the like house slave for the men and also the elder women in that sort of dynamic, right? So yeah, like we need to come up with like more, pro female or like female friendly sort of family dynamics. And I think that we're kind of in the middle of this like crazy cultural shift where patriarchy is failing. Like it's let's just be real. Look at the size society around us. Shit is fucked up. Okay, like we need to do something different. We need to do something better. And I think rethinking gender roles within the family is a big part of that. But go ahead, Floofy.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I'm
I
on
can
my
hear you.
phone. It's a bit yeah, a couple of things, just sort of like different points, but actually, in terms of violence, it's actually young societies that are the most violent. So when you have a lot, for obvious reasons, more energy, and if you have a lot of younger guys or just younger people in general, those societies are more violent. So I just want to mention that. So if you have you have a more balanced society, I mean, obviously these days in the West we've got big generations who are much older, but sorry, just that's just a sociological thing. Yeah, I don't consider myself like it's conservative. As I say, I grew up in a very left-wing household, and my mum worked full time, and I definitely didn't grow up with the kind of like these very strict gender roles. And I don't, I mean, I don't know, Lilith, if you're necessarily connecting that with me, but I just, I think we have to be careful that we just don't talk in like crazy stereotypes, because as I say, I'm from a Catholic background, and the families, we don't have a theology, for example, where women are supposed to be subservient to men. Not where I grew up in. It was very much like equal, in terms of how everybody treats each other and stuff like that. So I think it obviously depends on the culture and where you grow up and that kind of thing. And as I say, people actually would really work together to make things happen and look after each other and stuff like that. And as I say, that community used to be very left wing. And the left has kind of, as you say, it's abandoned so much the things that people used to really care about in terms of like economics and material help and that kind of thing. So I mean, I personally feel quite politically homeless because I don't see myself as right wing. The left wing now just seems to have become regressive, is not acknowledging biological reality and all these crazy things. And so I just politically, I mean, I barely think about politics because I have no idea like where I'm supposed to go. But I mean, I think a lot of people feel like that at the moment. So sorry, it looks like my phone's almost dead. So yeah, I guess it's just this kind of idea of the like super patriarchal right wing religious family. I mean, obviously that exists, but I mean, I feel like not in many communities, and maybe just in some, especially in America. America seems a lot more religious than say Europe, and has a certain there's certain kinds of communities that they definitely exist, but there's also plenty of communities that are not like that. So yeah, I guess I just want to be careful that we actually talk about real solutions that people can really live, and not talk in like really extreme stereotypes, because that's not very helpful and it doesn't really talk to our reality.
Yeah. I will acknowledge though, you asked about like my upbringing. I was not raised in the church. My mom was raised in the church, and she was actually very traumatized by her upbringing. My grandfather was an abusive alcoholic and used religion as a way of like every time my grandfather would beat my grandmother, she'd go to her priest and be like, help me, like what can I do kind of thing. And the priest would just be like, oh, we'll pray on it, and I'll talk to your husband, but like just focus on being a more godly woman and that kind of stuff. So some of the stories my mom told me, like I, were so maybe I'm biased, I guess, like against that kind of family structure, but at the same time, like the way she raised me, she kind of swung the pendulum in the opposite direction and was way too permissive. Like I started dating when I was 14. I wish my parents were more strict with me because some of the stuff I did when I was a teenager was terrible and like dangerous. And I'm honestly fortunate to be alive. Um, but yeah, so you mentioned like coming from a working class background and so on, and being like pro union and stuff. And so I wanted to say that I've been noticing a shift a lot with like young guys who are working class. A lot of them are conservative now. And the crazy thing talking to them is that they, I get the impression that like they're not actually conservative. They just feel sort of let down by sort of like neoliberal, like capitalist society. And I do, and it's important to keep in mind that these sorts of guys, like 40 years ago, would have been involved in like labor parties, would have been involved in union politics and that sort of stuff, like that demographic of men. But because of decimation of manufacturing jobs and so on, um, it's really like impacted working class communities, and it's made it really hard for men to provide and so on, or to contribute to their families and contribute in a meaningful way. So yeah, and I also wanted to say that I don't think all working class men are like bad, evil, and that's why I said earlier, I went from most, and I was like, maybe not most, maybe like some of them, kind of thing, right? Because yeah, I have met working class guys who are great people. I've met middle class and upper class guys who are great people. I've also met some upper class and middle class guys who were freaking sociopaths, and that's actually the danger of like higher class men, is that when things go sour, they have more money and more resources to like go after you and try to destroy you. So yeah, that's the other kind of risk. Yeah. So I think like my point being that like men of all classes, have issues with women sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know who wanted to go next. I think it was Hannah has her hand up. But go ahead.
Just a